Well, as we move on from conscience, sometimes people operate by what they say the majority believe. Whatever the most people believe, that's what I'll believe. And the majority can't be wrong. So whatever the verdict of the majority is, that's what I'm going to accept. And of course, that means you're giving up your thinking for yourself, and you're letting someone else, not God, but letting other people just determine what you're going to believe or what you're going to practice. And when you think about that, you have to ask, which majority are we talking about? If we're talking about the Middle East, the majority of the people there are Islamic.
Yeah.
And so you would be Islamic if you lived in Syria or in Lebanon. Or what about if you lived in Italy? Well, the majority there are Roman Catholic. What if you lived in Utah? The majority there are Mormon. And if you lived in the Soviet Union, the majority there claim to be atheist.
Yeah.
And so you've got to ask yourself what majority you're talking about.
That's right.
Majority really is not a good standard by which we should operate.
Well, we use the example quite a bit going back to Genesis chapter 6 with Noah and the ark and how God destroyed the entire world except for 8 souls. And again, the majority, they were evil. They were doing evil continually. And obviously that didn't mean that they were right about it. There's some other passages too. I know in Exodus chapter 23, there's an interesting statement there. In Exodus chapter 23, as the Lord was talking to his people, he said in verse number 1 and 2, "You should not bear a false report. Do not join your hand with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. You should not follow the masses in doing evil, or many men in doing evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute." The language there, "you shall not follow the masses in doing evil." Clearly there were people who were doing things that were wrong. He said you can't be like that.
So God says the majority just might be wrong.
Yep.
And Jesus, in talking about the judgment day in Matthew chapter 7 and verses 13 and 14, he said, "Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it." There's your majority. Then verse number 14, "Narrow is the gate, difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it." So there you've got the many versus the few. Jesus said you need to be in that number, that's the few.
Yeah.
And where's the majority going to be? Jesus makes it clear here that the majority will not be accepted by God on the judgment day. And think about this, that majority that stood in front of Pilate's judgment hall. What did the majority say?
They got it wrong.
They got it wrong.
Crucify him.
Yeah. They said Jesus should be put to death.
Even think about Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost. People who understand Acts chapter 2, they'll see that 3,000 souls were saved. That's a lot of people. But when you think about how many Jews would gather for the day of Pentecost, that was a few people with respect to the majority who were actually there. So there were many who decided not to follow the gospel message.
According to Josephus, when these Jewish feast days came along, there would sometimes be as many as 1 million Jews who would gather in Jerusalem. Now, 3,000 being baptized sounds like a huge number, but not compared to the number of people who were in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost.